I'm Jason Tamarick. The goal of every interview is to get truthful responses in a way that supports the story, but also gives you options in the editing room. So, in this module, we're going to explore techniques for conducting an interview, how to work with your subject, and what to look for so you leave the interview with the best possible footage. When you first meet your subject for the interview, it's important to take time to warm them up. Remember, most people have never appeared in front of the camera and can be nervous. So the first step of your job is to help put them at ease.
This is Lucia Riker. She is considered the greatest female boxer in history and a spectacular person, and we're thrilled to get her experience with respect to PTSD. She was a champion in a very violent sport, and so I'm sure that she has some things that she can be very educational for us about her perspective on this whole situation.
I almost never interview someone the very first time that I meet them. I find that it's almost always better to meet them first and tell them about your project and about yourself and find out a little bit about who they are, even if it's just for 10 or 15 minutes, and then schedule the interview, even if you're only scheduling it for a half hour later when you're going to go back to your car and get your gear and set it all up at some location. Because I think that, people are always more comfortable, to sit down if they've already met you one time. And also that way, you kind of get the pleasantries out of the way in that first meeting. So when you do sit down and you start the interview, you don't wind up with, them telling you things that are actually interesting or relevant, before you turn the camera on, which if you're not careful can easily happen, the first time you meet someone.
The key is, in the interview, is to really be able to make somebody comfortable, is to make them understand that what you're about to embark on is something that's going to be good for them, is something that is going to fulfill something in them. Because usually in everything that I've done, with the exception of some experts that are sort of just, they're regurgitating their textbook knowledge to me, which I need, the subjects of my interviews are usually people that have suffered through something or have gone through something. So I'm not a mental health professional, but I almost treat it as sort of a session, I mean, I really sort of intimate to them that this is going to be good for them.
The goal of every interview is to get truthful responses in a way that can be easily edited into the movie. At the beginning of each interview, set the parameters for the interview. Where would you like your subject to look? How much can the subject move or gesture within the frame? Should the subject incorporate the question into the answer? And finally, what length answer are you looking for? Whenever I begin an interview, I always tell my subjects three things. I tell them where to look by simply saying, okay, you can look directly at me throughout the interview. There is no need to look at the camera. Secondly, I'll say, just so you know, the audience will not hear me asking any of the questions, so could you please incorporate the question in the answer so it stands alone? And lastly, I always mention the length by saying, I'm looking for a series of short answers, say around 15 to 20 seconds. It usually takes a while for your subject to feel comfortable in front of the camera, so don't ask any important or difficult questions up front.
In the beginning, I always ask 1 to 3 kind of throwaway questions, real simple questions. Where are you from? What was it like when you grew up? I'm usually asking something that I know I'm not going to use, something that might, just kind of open up the topic. Because when people first sit in the chair, you want them to warm up, you want to feel each other out a little bit, get a sense of each other's style, and just get them used to talking on camera. So it takes usually 1 to 3 questions to get people warmed up and into the subject matter, and then I start jumping into the things where I know I'm going to get my sound bite. So I think that's important for people to warm up. The exception to the rule is when you're interviewing celebrities, the VIPs, where you have that really tight time frame. That's a whole other matter. Now you're dealing with a professional that's all they do is sit down and answer questions on the fly. They've already got the answers ready, so jump right to the heart of the matter in that case. But with regular people, warm them up a little bit.
You're building a rapport with your subject. You're building comfort with your subject. And if you do your job, which is that you listen to them and you look at them, you will find that they will be dramatically more relaxed at the end of the interview than when they started. And some of them have actually, many of them come up and said, that was way easier. Oh, we're done already? Oh, that was way easier than I thought. That's a reward. That means you've done your job in terms of making the subject feel comfortable.
Although you have planned your questions out in advance, they can sometimes become a hindrance. Don't be a slave to the questions, and don't be afraid to let go of the questions to let the interview unfold organically.
One thing about documentaries is that it's full of contradictions, and so one of the classics is that if you're going to go in do an interview, you have to be completely prepared, and you want to have questions ahead of time, and you want to have them all written down and be really thorough. But the contradiction, though, is that once you've done all that, you kind of have to put it aside and really just listen and ask in a really curious way. I'm really interested in what you have to say. I'm really curious about this. Can you tell me more? And by feeling that genuinely, then people really open up and they start to tell their story for real.
You've chosen your subjects for a reason. You've chosen them because they're interesting, or because they have an experience that's meaningful, or because they're in a position of power or authority. You've chosen these people. Let them tell their story. Get into their story. Don't let them tell your story, let them tell their story. And that's the difference between a great, compelling documentary and something that just sort of scratches the surface.
If you have a list of questions in front of you and you stick to those questions, chances are you're looking for an opportunity to get to the next question and you're not listening to what's there. And a good interviewer works off what the interviewee says, not what the interviewer wants. You want to make an interview organic, and the organism is your interview subject, your interviewee. You want to listen and you want to look for subtext. What's going on under the surface? Would you say that, such and such? Do you mean that, such and such? Are you really saying such and such? You're always trying to tease out that which lies below the surface. And if you work from a list of questions, you're not going to do that.
The great thing about being the interviewer is you don't have to have any answers. In fact, throw all your answers out.